At exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke up to a blaring alarm, the sound of tires screeching, and the blinding flash of blue and red lights bouncing off my bedroom walls. I stumbled to the window, heart pounding, only to witness something that looked like the opening scene of a Hollywood raid. Armed officers stormed the street with precision, barking commands through radios. But that wasn't the shocking part. The real gut punch. My Jeep, the same one I'd locked and parked in front of my property par. Very specific instructions from the local police. Task force was gone. Vanished. And in its place, a bright orange parking cone with a sticky note on it that read, "Code violation. HOA confiscated." I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or laugh at the absurdity of it. Karen from the HOA had just cut the lock off a law enforcement vehicle and towed it like it was an abandoned mattress. She had no idea she'd just torched a months-long surveillance operation. Moving into Willow Creek Estates was supposed to be a fresh start. After years of serving overseas and bouncing between cities, I was ready to settle down. Peace. Quiet. A garage big enough to rebuild motorcycles in. And for a while, it was perfect. Until I met Linda Farthington, known among locals as Karen Supreme. She was the HOA president and a one-woman crusade for community standards. If your grass was a half-inch too tall, fine. If your Halloween lights stayed up past October 31st, written warning. And if you drove a rugged black Jeep with military blackout plating, apparently a war crime. She stared at my Jeep like it insulted her ancestors. I tried to be civil, explained. It was part of my consulting work with local law enforcement. She sneered, "Nice story, soldier boy. Try a Honda like a normal person." My neighbor Rick, who practically lived on his porch and recorded everything with his Ring cam, caught the whole thing. Karen looked straight into the camera and said, "One less eyesore to worry about," smirking as she cut the lock. By the time I got home, the Jeep was gone. At first, I thought it was stolen until I saw the cone and the note. I called the task force immediately. They were at my door within 30 minutes. Officer Melendez turned pale watching the footage. She cut the lock and towed the Jeep without authorization. I nodded, sweating bullets. That's tampering with federal surveillance equipment. That's obstruction. An emergency retrieval order was launched. But the Jeep wasn't in any known tow yards. It had vanished into some off-the-record abyss. Meanwhile, the operation was shut down. The suspect spooked. A federal sting operation dismantled by a suburban tyrant with a god complex. Hours later, the Jeep was found behind a rusted gate near the HOA maintenance shed, an unofficial graveyard full of ticketed cars and tarps. My Jeep. Scratched, dirty. The surveillance drive case wide open. Desecrated. Melendez muttered. This is a private HOA impound lot. She's running her own operation out of a damn utility shed. Then Karen arrived. Clip-clopping in heels. Smiling like she was at a brunch. "Oh good, you found it," she chirped. Melendez cut her off mid-sentence. "You removed federal surveillance property. Do you understand how serious this is?" She looked baffled. "It was a visual nuisance," she said, like she deserved a medal. Later, at an emergency HOA meeting, Karen tried to defend herself. Not apologize, defend. Residents were furious. Reporters showed up. Lawyers, too. Karen didn't know it yet, but she was no longer president of anything. She was a suspect. And the only thing more ridiculous than what she did was how long it took for someone to stop her. Karen tapped the microphone twice like she was warming up for a TED Talk. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, voice syrupy sweet. "I want to address the recent incident involving the removal of an illegally parked, unregistered vehicle from our street. There's been a great deal of confusion, misinformation, and frankly hysteria surrounding this event." Someone near the back snorted. "I was pretty sure it was Rick." Karen continued undeterred, "As your HOA president, I take our community's safety and aesthetic standards very seriously. When I saw an unsightly, clearly abandoned Jeep parked for days on end, chained and unmoved, I followed the proper procedure to have it removed. I had no knowledge of any view covert operations, nor was I informed that the vehicle belonged to any government agency. Frankly, I believe I was misled. That was when I stood up." "Misled," I said loudly. "You cut the lock off a federal vehicle. You towed it without authorization. And you bragged about it on Facebook." There was a wave of murmurs. Karen shot me a glare, but I didn't sit down. I walked to the front of the room, pulled out a small USB drive, and handed it to the community center's IT guy, who was already standing by the projector like he'd been waiting for this moment all week. The screen flickered to life. First came the ring cam footage, Karen slicing the lock, gesturing to the tow truck, laughing as it drove off. Then came the Facebook screenshots, one by one. Her posts about taking action, her mocking comments about military cosplay, and the one where she proudly declared, "Sometimes you have to break the rules to keep the streets clean." The room went silent. One of the board members, a man named Greg who had always looked vaguely terrified of Karen, cleared his throat and whispered something to the person next to him. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. She turned back to the crowd, her voice slightly more strained now. "Okay, so perhaps I was misinformed about the ownership of the vehicle. But the vehicle was clearly violating HOA standards and the bylaws. Give me the authority." "No they don't," said a voice from the side of the room. Everyone turned. It was Detective Sasha Lynn. She stepped forward calmly, holding a thick folder. "We've reviewed the HOA charter, the removal procedures, and the documentation, or lack thereof. Not only did you bypass the board, you failed to notify any enforcement agency, used an unlicensed tow company, and relocated the vehicle to an unauthorized storage site. You've apparently been operating without community consent." Karen opened her mouth, but Sasha wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the property in question was part of a sanctioned joint task force operation. Your actions compromised months of surveillance, damaged sensitive equipment, and resulted in the premature termination of an active case." Another wave of gasps and murmurs filled the room. Karen's face twitched, and she turned to the board for support. But they were all leaning away from her like passengers trying to escape the splash zone. Greg suddenly stood up and spoke. "I'd like to make a motion to suspend Linda Farthington from her position as HOA president pending an internal investigation and legal review." Before Karen could respond, another board member raised a hand and said, "Seconded." A third member mumbled, "All in favor." A unanimous chorus of "I" echoed through the room. Karen's mouth fell open. She looked stunned, as if this outcome had never even occurred to her in the worst of her nightmares. "You can't do this," she said, voice rising. "This is a power grab. I built this HOA. I've served this community for 6 years and destroyed it in one afternoon," I said, stepping back beside Sasha. Karen tried to compose herself, flipping through her clipboard, as if she could paperwork her way out of this disaster. Then, in a move so audacious it stunned even the legal observers, she pulled out a letter and waved it in the air. "This is a cease and desist order filed by my attorney against the local police department and Mr. Jacobs for entrapment, defamation, and emotional distress. You'll all be hearing from my legal team very soon." Sasha calmly stepped forward, took the letter, glanced at it, then handed it back. "That lawyer Trent Maxwell. We are familiar with him. He's already under investigation for misconduct in 3 other HOA-related lawsuits. Good luck. At that point, Karen realized she was alone. Even the people who had always supported her, the ones who had backed her crusades against lawn ornaments and mailboxes that weren't regulation beige, were silent. Rick leaned over and whispered, "Ding dong, the witch is cooked." She stormed out of the room, but not before barking, "You haven't heard the last of this." Over her shoulder, after she was gone, the atmosphere shifted. People started to breathe again. Someone actually clapped, then another. Soon the whole room was cheering. It was surreal, a spontaneous standing ovation for the downfall of a tyrant wrapped in HOA authority. That night I slept like a rock. No sirens, no flashing lights, no angry emails about my garage door color. But I knew the battle wasn't completely over. Karen still had lawyers, and she wasn't the type to fade quietly into obscurity. But now she was off the throne. And the neighborhood, for the first time in years, had a chance to breathe. Within 48 hours of the HOA coup, the story blew up faster than I ever expected. It started when Rick uploaded the ring footage to Reddit under the entitled People subreddit with the caption, "Ho Karen cuts lock to impound my neighbors. Jeep didn't know it belonged to a federal task force." It hit the front page in 2 hours. By lunchtime, the video had over 2 million views. And by nightfall, Karen's face was plastered across TikTok, YouTube, and even one guy's angry Twitter thread calling her suburbia's most dangerous tyrant. News vans rolled into the neighborhood like we were ground zero for HOA warfare. People actually drove in from other towns just to get selfies in front of the infamous Jeep, which the police had since returned to me, scratches and all. The funny part? That Jeep had gone from being a visual nuisance to a local celebrity. Someone even made a parody GoFundMe titled, "Save the Tactical Jeep." And jokingly, people donated enough to pay for a brand new coat of paint. I went with matte black, fitting, given the Jeep had now become a rolling symbol of Karen's downfall. But underneath the jokes and memes, the situation was still serious. The surveillance gear had been destroyed, setting back months of police work. The task force was still trying to recover from the disruption. And Karen, despite being suspended, was far from done causing chaos. A few days after the meeting, Karen re-emerged with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. She showed up in a wrinkled suit outside the local courthouse holding a press conference no one asked for, flanked by her slippery new attorney, Trent Maxwell, the same guy Sasha warned me about. Trent was a cartoon character of a lawyer, slicked back hair, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of smirk you'd only see on a man who once got a parking ticket dismissed by threatening to sue the DMV. He claimed Karen was the real victim, alleging that the police had failed to label the Jeep as official property, that I had deliberately baited her, and that the HOA bylaws gave her immunity from any municipal or federal repercussions. It was such a stretch even the news anchor covering it laughed midway through her segment.